Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we are doing something a little bit different. We are not going to talk about specific aircraft types I want to see in the game, but rather different mechanics or improvements I would like to see in the game, and stuff that I would think make the game a little bit more exciting. Now, of course, there are always the standard things like BR decompression or World War II tanks should not fight post-war tanks. We all know that stuff. That's the mainstream stuff everybody's gonna talk about. But today we are talking about more less mainstream stuff. Ideas that just have crept into my head over my years of playing the game, and just noticing things that I would like to change personally, or just stuff I would like to see improved. And before we start, by the way, I noticed that a lot of people seem to really like the series about aircraft that need to be introduced into War Thunder, and there are two videos in the works with the British aircraft and the French aircraft, so look out for them in the upcoming weeks. But as for this video, I'd say let's cut to the chase and start right away with the first thing I would like to see. The first one is actually just really more of a cosmetic thing, and that is the introduction of ejection seats. We have several high-tier jets in the game, all of which are or should be equipped with ejection seats of various manufacturers, most prominently of course Martin Baker. But yeah, they are not, as far as I know, modeled in the game. It would be nice to just have this little animation when you jay out of the cockpit, either if you get shot down or jay out for whatever reason, that the ejection seat is deployed. I think that this would not be too difficult to implement, just having this little bit of animation, which would make it more realistic, not only for the high-tier jets, but there are also several World War II vehicles that had ejection seats, particularly some of the German ones like the Heinkel 219, the 162, and the Dornier 335 had it as well. By the way, another thing that should be added, if we are speaking of that, is that the Dornier 335, before the pilot ejects, should blow its rear propeller off. This is something that was done in real life. There were like small explosive charges that blew off the propeller blades in order to for the pilot to safely eject. But yeah, I think this would be just a nice little cosmetic addition that should be added into the game. The next point is map design, particular RRB. This is what most RRB maps look like. Lots of open spaces, open sky, and you know, that's fun and all. But it does get a little bit boring after a while, in my opinion. That's what I like. I would love to see more maps like we have in Arcade. For example, this is African Canyon, which is a great dogfighting map. You have all these different terrain features, these gorges, these mountains, and you can use them to your advantage in dogfights. And that is something we are currently missing in RRB. You don't really have many maps that feature such terrain feature. There's this one city map where you can sort of fight in between the houses, in between the skyscrapers, but that's about it. Just having a map like this would be just so much better, in my opinion. And you know, not every map needs to be like this. And of course, arcade maps can't be implemented one-to-one into the game. They tried it a few years ago and it failed spectacularly. But still enlarge the maps and have more areas where dogfights in more confined spaces can take place. Another great example for this is the map Pacific Hidden Base, which is another arcade map. Here I'm taking the Heinkel 162 out with realistic, with RB settings. And a lot of people seem to be of the opinion that the spaces would be too confined for jets to properly fight, but that's not really true. And even so, just tweak the maps accordingly. I mean, I can throw the Heinkel 162 on this map around without problems, and just look at that. Look at the map design. First of all, it looks beautiful, and you have all these. You have even these holes here in the mountains. Imagine having that in RB. It would be so much fun. It would also be very interesting to see how missiles behave in this scenario. The current meta at high top tier, of course, is BVR with the F-14 and stuff like that. But imagine having just occasionally maps that feature such terrain features. It would be much more interesting and would give the dogfighting aspect of top tier much more relevance, which is something I would definitely like to see. And lastly, of course, we need high altitude maps. There are several high altitude aircraft, the Ta-152, the BB-155, or even the B-29, that operate very well at high altitude. But they just can't really operate to their specifications, because most maps, the fights take place below 6,000 meters. And I would just love to see maybe a map that has their spawn point or their airfield on a mountain ridge, and maybe start out at like 7,000 or 8,000 meters. It might not be too realistic to have an airport up there, but hell, the game mode is called RB, and still you have fights between F-14s that would not take place in real life. Yeah, of course, Iran has F-14s, but there are American teams versus American teams in the RB, so it doesn't really make sense anyways. So having, I wouldn't call them fantasy maps, but just like having maps that are a little bit more elaborate would definitely be something that would spice up the RB experience, in my opinion. And the next thing I would like to see added into the game is again something that might seem a little bit more trivial, but it's something I would really love to have, and that would be correct abbreviation callouts for the different kinds of missiles when they are launched from their aircraft. Currently, all the RRB voice lines are distributed all over the entirety of the tech tree, with the lowest tier biplanes having the same voice lines as the highest top tier fighters. And keep in mind, we are now getting Generation 4 aircraft as like the F-16 and MiG-29 into the game, so it would be nice to see more up-to-date voice lines, particularly for these later aircraft, since they have way more elaborate electronic suits and of course different weapon systems. And in reality, we do have different abbreviation codes for the different kinds of missiles that can be launched from these aircraft: Fox 1, Fox 2 and Fox 3, with Fox 1 designating short-range infrared missiles like the M9 Sidewinder, Fox 2 being semi-active radar homing missiles like the M7 Sparrow, and Fox 3 being active radar homing missiles such as the American AIM-120 AMRAAM. And it would be nice to hear like the abbreviation code out voice line like Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3 from the pilot in the game. It might be a more minor thing, but still I would just like to see it, just for that little bit extra bit of realism. And now we come to something that is more on a personal note and might be actually a little bit controversial. But what I'm proposing is an additional game mode called a semi-realistic ground RB mode. And for context, I actually loved playing Tank RB back in the early days. Of course, nowadays I play AB exclusively in ground forces mode, but back in the day I was actually pretty good at ground RB as well, until they removed markers, and this is something I just never really adapted to. I stopped playing Tank RB after markers were removed because I just couldn't really adapt to it, I have to admit it. And because I love planning ahead, I love knowing where my enemy is positioned and plan my battle strategy according to that. Nowadays that's of course not really possible with markers removed. Of course, you can sort of anticipate where certain tanks are gonna go, but then again, you don't know what your enemy is necessarily made up of, other than a vague guess maybe. And that's why I would love to see a semi-realistic tank mode that would have all the realistic physics and models, but with the spotting mechanics as they were in the early days, or maybe with some adaptation to it, but still just knowing where your enemy is positioned. I would love to see it in game, just this semi-realistic Tank RB mode. It would sort of be like arcade but with realistic models, which is something that is one of my main problems with Tank Arcade. I I don't really have a problem with aiming in tank RB, it's not that difficult, at least for me, but just knowing where your enemy is positioned would be nice, and I would love to see that in the game. Of course, such a mode would also be devoid of aircraft, because we all know how powerful CAS is at the moment throughout the entire ground RB envelope. Well, with the exception of certain aircraft, and that's when we come to the number one spot, what I would love to see in the game. And at the number one spot, we find the inclusion and introduction of dedicated reconnaissance aircraft. Currently we don't have these in the game, with the exception of some of the UAVs we find at high tier tank battles, but really dedicated reconnaissance aircraft are absent from War Thunder at the moment. And they could actually fill a pretty cool role in the game. The way I see it, of course, there are two types of reconnaissance aircraft, that being the strategic and the tactical reconnaissance aircraft. And the only ones that should be included are the tactical ones, since strategic ones such as the SR-71 and U-2 are extremely cool, but they wouldn't really have a place in the game. However, tactical reconnaissance aircraft certainly do. There are of course more modern ones, but there are also World War II air vehicles that fit the bill. There are two that come to mind, at least for me directly, that being the Japanese C6-in-1 Saiyan and the Kawasaki Ki-46, both dedicated reconnaissance aircraft that saw active service during World War II. And the way these could be implemented into the game is rather simple. They would most likely be useful in tank battles, maybe even with some synergy with the semi-realistic tank mode, and that mode's spotting mechanics. They could be implemented in a way that once a player chooses to take out a reconnaissance aircraft, he circles the battlefield and spots enemy tanks with the same mechanics as they do with light tanks in tank RB, only that when the tank is seen and spotted, that the player's name and tank type and exact position on the map is shown. And in order for this to work, reconnaissance aircraft of course should stay under a certain altitude, otherwise they would just climb to the space and use their cameras to spot from there. But of course that would be really unfair, so it should be implemented in a way that the spotting mechanics only works below a certain altitude. That way not only anti-aircraft players would have a role, and a pretty crucial one at that, because once the enemy reconnaissance aircraft is shot down, it can't provide any more spotting, which of course will make the gifty team a disadvantage. But yeah, not only that, but some reconnaissance aircraft also are armed. Of course, there were regular conversions of regular fighter aircraft. For example, the Germans had Rüstsätze for their Bf-109 and FW-190 that could transform them into short-range reconnaissance aircraft. And with that, the air battles in tank mode would actually be more fun and more crucial to the overall strategy of the team, without them taking direct influence or without them making direct attacks on the ground forces while still maintaining a powerful presence. And that's something I would really like to see, actually. And the way the reconnaissance should work is of course like in the light tank, that when a player spots an enemy tank and that tank gets destroyed, he gets a share of the alliance and experience. And I think that actually would be a pretty fun addition to the game, I have to be honest. Of course, everything would need to be worked out in detail, but that's just a vague proposal I would make. And yeah, the introduction of reconnaissance aircraft, definitely something I wanted to see in the game for a pretty long time, and I hope it comes one day. But yeah, that's it for today's video. Went a little bit on a rant there, on rambling. But yes, these are 5 mechanics I would love to see in the game. I hope you found this video interesting, and maybe write me your opinion down in the comments of what you would like to see added to the game. Until then, I'll catch you in the next one.